This is the Space Podcast.
I just finished watching that interview with David Foster Wallace that I sent you, and that interview was in 2003,
Yeah.
and some of the question seemed to be what he was sort of prophesying back then about fame and spectacle, especially as it occurs in the U.S. And he's talking about this before. He doesn't even really mention the internet much at all in his interview. So
it was hard to say things in 2003 about the internet. It was very much in its infancy. I mean, now it's in its infancy.
Right.
It was a fetal internet.
Right. It was a twinkle in our eye.
Yeah,
so
yeah. YouTube wasn't even a thing until 2005.
Oh, was that the date? Okay.
Yep.
So I don't know, man. It seems like to some degree, maybe something about the ease, the democratization of media. I mean, like you and I have microphones and cameras, and we're broadcasting essentially. We're essentially a little TV station or a little TV show.
Yeah.
But I've got 10-year-old equipment that I'm running on and stuff that there was not a huge barrier to get into it because the substrate of the internet, Google is doing lifting all the heavy weight with all the algorithms and the
right
essentially the broadcasting. So to what
Right.
degree does that ease
the infrastructure
of us
is outsourced to the central brain?
Yeah, you don't have to be a local affiliate of any major.
Right.
You don't have to have a connection to CBS or anything or ABC or anything like that. You can just buy a mic and go, or have use your phone that you paid maybe got subsidized and paid nothing for, and start broadcasting.
Well, consider PewDiePie, who still films on substandard equipment, considering, I mean, the fact how huge he is. He's got 102 million subscribers, and he regularly uses webcams and doesn't really care that much about quality still.
Yeah, and
his microphone is duct taped to he's got a rubber band around it.
He's keeping it real.
He is. I like that. I think that's good. There's an authenticity there.
Yeah, and to what degree? So if you think of was an intermediary step between broadcast television and sort of this massive access to broadcasting we have now, something like Jackass, in the sense that something like Jackass was not it wasn't a production in the sense that you didn't have to have people come in and build a set. You just took a camera somewhere and started shooting stuff. And so, I mean, that's what we're doing right now. I can see your living room behind you, and you can see my bed behind me, and there's nothing, it's just immediate and more relatable than if I'm watching something like Friends. I know that Friends is a myth in the sense that it's a production, that's a set, even though it's made to look like I could live there, or I'd want to live there in that apartment.
Speaking of myth, though, and I know that this is not really related to our conversation, and it may get cut out or made a separate video, who knows. But speaking of myth, if the serious writing, Breaking Bad writing staff, at a whiteboard, really thinking through all of this stuff, or Star Trek or whatever it is the way that modern myths are carried forward, right? Then is the democratization somehow fuzzing that out or reducing it as a way to sort of, I mean, most YouTube channels don't have any sort of structure or any sort of there's nothing in them often as a story that you get that maybe would instill some sort of new idea or value that maybe stories of old might, generally speaking. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you think that? So,
Desperate Housewives of, was it Desperate House? I don't know what it's called. The Orange County show, Jersey Shore. Is a version of that, I guess. But
yeah. So Eliade talks about the demythologization. Yeah, demythologization of myth, and a historicizing of myth, in the sense that, thinking about the story of Jesus, Jesus was a real person. There were real kings. There were these actual events that were happening. And so when you do that, it just makes it mundane. You take away sort of the evoking power of that story.
Well,
And
the Christian myth is based on Christ being real, though.
right. And then also the Christian myth is based on a ton of other myths that came before it, Mithra and all these things. So it seems like still packed into that story specifically is a lot of non-history.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Mm.
A lot of myth and just a narrative that's existed forever, regardless of the time when it happened. So, and if you think about it, or it seems that in some ways that those myths were the science of the day, in the sense that, like you read in Masks of God, that when at a certain point in history, when the priests started looking, or when people started looking up into the heavens and noticed a mathematical regularity in the stars, and then they started to mimic what they saw in the stars on Earth with the ritual regicide, the killing of the king every 4 years because a certain constellation will pass through another constellation. So, and then they would build up this myth, this fake story to justify or to convey this sort of mathematical thing they're seeing in the heavens.
Because you can't do better at the time. You don't know anything else.
Yeah,
and it looks like. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, and if you look at what we have today, we have Cosmos, we have Carl Sagan, we have Neil deGrasse Tyson, we have all of these. We're more infatuated by what we would call the hard science of it.
Empiricism.
We don't ask,
Empiricism.
Yeah, we don't ask Carl Sagan to give us a story about iron balls that represent a fiery hell in a Sanskrit terminology that's encircled by a dragon with the mother figure on top of the iron. Just crazy stuff. It's more like, here's the math.
So absence of knowledge, or an absence of empiricism, well, at the time, maybe empiricism 1.0, I see it looks like that, and because it looks like that, then, it must mean something about the corn growing, or it must mean something about what we should do in our sort of social structure. That, because it's based on, it's not based on the full picture, allows for the proliferation of cultural ideas that then help to sort of shape future generations and give structure to things like marriage and norms. And when the more sort of like, I wonder if there's a sort of scale where one goes up and the other goes down. The more we know and the more we understand, the less room there is for interpretation, and therefore the less room we have for myth and storytelling. It's a neutrino. That's what it is. There's no story about it. It's just a neutrino. It doesn't have mass. So that, once you know it, then you know it, and there isn't really. Then you have to sort of derive your own meaning, maybe. But maybe we're just in a transition period where that sort of all builds up into some new mythology.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this a little bit in the True Detective discussion, where the things we're talking about now is, well, of course gravity works this way, or of course the stars do this or that, and of course we don't believe in the Christ story and its sort of magical mythic.
Yeah.
Or the story of Noah, of course. So we have a certainty that what we have right now is the pinnacle of consciousness and knowledge of how to use consciousness. But what about 100 years from now? What things do we think now that people in 100 years are going to look back on as foolish? But right now, the things that we believe help us interact with reality as we know it.
Right.
Like chemistry and that kind of stuff. But what kind of thing is going to be discovered in the future that might put under the way we understand chemistry in a different light? Because it's happened before, and it seems to have happened all the time, or just over and over again. Does that make sense? Yeah,
that makes sense. Well, I mean, I think that it depends on how you bifurcate understanding what reality is. Is reality the interpretation of the facts, or is it just the facts? And then, I mean, that's a whole other discussion.
And then you'd get into the stuff that Campbell talks about, or the stuff that who's the guy that wrote Brave New World? Aldous Huxley.
Yeah, I actually I just got that. I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, so he wrote a short book called The Doors of Perception.
Got that too.
Yeah, it's cool, and
that's the book that started Terrence McKenna on his journey.
Was it?
Yep.
Okay. And I think the doors of perception is a line pulled from William Blake, which the line I think is, if the doors of perception were cleansed, then we would see everything as perfect. And in the sense that the doors of perception are the instruments that we use to perceive reality, like touch, our mind, our eyes, our ears, and that kind of thing. Those are the doorways to
Right.
the world outside of us. And how do the ways that our eyes and ears function and that kind of thing transparently reveal the world around us, and how does it cloud the world around us?
And how do you tell if it's moving in a bad direction or a good direction? I've been thinking about this kind of a lot recently, because whenever someone says or criticizes the use of cell phones, whenever someone is too critical of it, I don't know why. I should say, yeah, you're right. I mean, kids these days looking at their phones, I understand that where it's coming from, but somehow it rubs me the wrong way, and I always sort of wonder why it is, and I think about it a lot. And is it an okay boomer type thing, or is it a real concern? And I guess there is some science around 13-year-old girls who check Instagram too often and develop eating disorders, but that existed when there were fashion magazines. It's as old as time, or at least as old as America. But on the
what
other
was
side,
before that?
the British Empire.
Never heard of it.
Yeah. But on the other hand, a phone is an additional sense organ. It's just an extension of the brain, and a smartwatch is an additional sense organ. I actually, this started when I started using an Apple Watch recently. I started using an Apple Watch, and I noticed that I wasn't checking things, but I knew what things meant based on vibrations on my wrist. So I have it hooked up so that one of the student lobbies for the teaching company is connected to WeChat, right? And so when it buzzes once, I know that a class has come in. If it buzzes again, I know that a teacher took it, and so I can sort of rest at ease. And so I don't have to always be checking my phone to make sure classes are being grabbed. It's just on my wrist. So in a sense, it is a sensation, and my watch is a way to bring the information from the internet into my brain. So why should I complain that it's this watch? Why are you always checking your watch, or why are you always checking your phone? Or is it a new way to retrieve information from the cloud? And the cloud is the collective unconscious, or this sort of forming thing that is global consciousness. Yeah. And the device is just a way to sort of tap into it as our eyes tap into the physical world around us, right? As our fingers tap into the physical world. And why is it that different? And why would we be critical of something that connects us to this wonderful place that we didn't have 30 years ago, right? I mean, there's no going back. If you went back 30 years, we would both be bored out of our minds. It's unimaginable. So whatever it is that the internet is becoming, and whatever it is that technology is developing, could lead to this new sixth sense that connects us directly to the internet, which becomes totally natural. We don't even think about it in the future,
Yeah, and I mean, do you think that there's a level of that already existing? Because I know it. Like, I will plan my day or plan things that I do around being able to check the internet. Like, its existence is already an integral part of the way that my mind works. That if I'm going to go somewhere and I need to check a bus time, well, I've got the internet. I don't need to look at, I don't need to go get a paper. I don't need to walk down to the stop and read the time on it.
Yeah.
So
that's
it's already
for the old ladies to do.
Right. Yeah.
The boomers.
You mean baby boomers?
You know the expression that's going around these days. It's okay, boomer.
I've seen that. I saw the word, but I haven't. I think
it's a great meme because the baby boomers a lot of them are reacting to it like it's the new N-word or something, like it's disparaging of old people. But I think it's great. It's sort of it's a word it's like okay, old person, you don't really understand that our generation, we're not just whining that we have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in university debt. We're not just whining that it's harder to get into, certain jobs. Your time was actually different than our time, right? And so we're not just complaining. It's a real issue. So when someone says, "Oh, you're just lazy," what do you mean you can't pay for college? We say, "Okay, boomer."
Yeah. So it's like
great.
It's the millennials sort of
Battle
weapon
cry?
of choice. Yeah. Yeah.
It's harmless, but the level of the reaction from boomers is hilarious. They're up in arms about it. We're ungrateful.
Is that what? So would a double whammy be like, okay, boomer, learn to code?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and this, I mean, the idea we're talking about now brings back sort of the her discussion, in the sense that anytime anything comes along, like I was reading in Guns, Germs, and Steel, you've got these inventions that'll come along, and they'll be invented, but then it'll be an innovation in some way, but then it'll get used for a totally different purpose. I think he was talking about the invention of the car was originally, the beginning of it, the idea was to have the car be used for something else, but then once it hit the mass market, it got totally used for just something else completely.
What was it supposed to be used for originally? It seems like there's only one purpose.
Yeah, I forgot. And he gives several
transporting
examples
furs from Canada.
Yeah, I think syrup. I don't know. It was
That's true of many innovations, though, where there's a very microscopic initial first. I mean, that's true of early adopters. That's true of so many things. There's a very small use case, and then it explodes far beyond the original intention, if it's a useful technology.
And it always becomes useful for pornography in some way.
Right.
Maybe that's the litmus test. Yeah. Right.
You're talking about Yeah, speaking of car porn, that's what I was going to mention. As I was gonna see if we could who could come up with the funniest fetish ideas. And I was going to say, as we're talking about Enemy, and he's got a foot thing, I was going to say I've got a fetish for red station wagons.
All right.
But now, yeah, I guess
hot.
I'm not. Yeah, I had a red station wagon when I was a kid, and it had two seats in the back that looked backward, and that was always just the most unbelievable thing, to sit in the back of the station wagon and look at the cars behind, and make them honk. That's the greatest thing you can do.
I got a friend from home, and he had a station wagon like that too, and the seats that would look backwards kind of folded down, and so you could fold them down and put
versatile
stuff back there.
It's a station wagon.
Yeah. Toyota, Mercedes, take note. Tesla, this
guys, get
put
with
you
the
on the
program.
map. Yeah.
Do it for the kids.
Listen to what all the people that write nostalgia as people that are nostalgic for the past get older and have money, then all the movies about their nostalgic things start coming out. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, X-Men, all this stuff.
Sonic the Hedgehog.
Oh God. But with the technology thing, I was curious. It's not. I don't like to look at it as a wholly good or wholly bad thing. It's more like it's just a thing. It's like a gun. I mean, a gun is not an evil or a good thing. It's just this. It's a conglomeration of mass that does a specific thing.
A gun is
and
a
you
platform.
Can use it. Yeah, and you can go hunt food and feed your family with it, or you can, harm people. You can shoot people with it. So it's kind of, well, how is the internet the same way? How is it the kind of thing that can nourish you like a gun used for hunting can, or destroy people? So
yeah, well, I think that's why sort of looking at past things, we can probably look at past things like guns in modern terms. If we consider all of those types of things as platforms, we can sort of apply analogously the development of our own platforms in shorter time spans, because something like Facebook in the last 10 years has changed so much, or something like Google has changed so much, then we can sort of consider other things that are not, digital in the same way, and sort of watch their evolution and watch their applications. I think eventually there might be a study of anthropology that looks at things in the past in sort of modern, or through the lens of modern digital, what do I want to say, creations.
Okay.
Yeah, like guns as a platform.
Yeah.
Early adopters, mass, critical mass, use cases. You could apply all of that stuff to the firearm adoption and usage.
So just to add a little bit of novelty to the discussion, in Guns, Germs, and Steel, he talks about a few instances where inventions came into a society but then were rejected, like the canoe for some people groups that lived, I think, around the water, that the canoe came along, but they just which would allow them to get out, like, I don't know, travel, get out on the water and fish, but they rejected it. They didn't want it. They never used it again. I think the firearms, the bow, those people are gone now, by the way. The bow and arrow boomers. Is one. Yeah. Resistance is futile.
Yeah.
So, but it's an interesting. We think of the inevitability of these essential technologies, whatever it may have been, the horse, the chariot, a bow and arrow, just becoming ubiquitous and taking over wherever it lands. And how could you be so dumb to reject it? But then in some cases, these smaller, more insular societies really did reject something that could have been efficient. So I wonder if maybe there's anything we'll do that with in the future.
That's interesting. I'm sure it happens in sort of plenty of cases. I mean, look at the Amish with electricity, but it is inevitable. It is inevitable if you look at it on the most macroscopic scale. It is a giant iceberg that is just drilling through the landscape, and it will eventually overtake, and then something else will come in its place. And if a small group decides not to adopt it, maybe they do go extinct, or it's not that their thing that is not the innovation, that is opposed to the innovation, that doesn't go viral. It's the 90% or the 80% who adopts it quickly, and then because that's an innovation, it leads to something better, and then 20 years later it's seen as unfathomable that didn't exist. When electricity first started being introduced to homes, there was a huge outcry among, I think it was people in the United States, who said, well, we've calculated it, and it could kill 5,000 people a year. And that turned out to be exactly right. It does kill 5,000 people a year. And we just accept that as acceptable losses. Automobiles, think about how many people die from that. That's acceptable, quote unquote, acceptable losses.
Right. Yeah.
Vaccines.
It seems like so when you have an innovation that could be harmful, as long as that harm doesn't happen to you, it only makes your life easier or more desirable, then you're going to adopt it. But then what happens when, there's an innovation that for you and I, it has this remarkable benefit or remarkable perceived benefit, but then for the people that sort of have to produce that innovation, it's detrimental. It's like destroys their livelihood or their way of life. But I'm not conscious of that. And even if I kind of know about it, but I don't feel it, I don't feel what that person is going through, then I'm probably not going to reject that innovation. But as time marches forward, and hopefully, people have more intimate awareness and knowledge of each other, that the things that we adopt will be more broadly beneficial to everybody in a more conscious way, rather than what's a good example? Cheap clothes. Let's just say cheap clothing. Like
you love that example. You always mention that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to. I mean, there's a lot of examples. You pick the phone, the computer, any electronic, essentially, but the effect that it has on the people that produce that thing, who are so far removed from me, and what are the negative effects for them? And if I were in their shoes, would I damn the person who keeps buying this thing and making a demand for the factory to exist where then I have to work kind of thing. Or
So
and,
but that's yeah. Well, go ahead.
and I was just going to wrap it up by saying that, but what if I had, if the person that was making that stuff was my neighbor and I saw how it affected them, then I might be less likely to contribute to the need for the thing they're producing to exist. And I might just do something different, maybe something better because it's better for me and I know it's better for them. So the fact that they're doing well makes me feel good too, because I don't see them in misery. I see them as like a healthy neighbor or whatever
Right.
that I would want to hang out with. So more of a, rather than existing in a place of extremes, it's more like, no, everything's kind of good.
That
Just not as
really
extreme.
that really jives with Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature.
Really?
And
Okay.
yeah, so there is, I mean, if you look historically, there is a very steady gradient of the opening up of the spheres of empathy. I mean, only a few hundred years ago, people would have a conversation. Should we go see a show or should we go see the execution? What do you want to do? Or, oh, look, someone's on the rack. Cool. You know, someone being ripped apart by you know, on the breaking wheel. Their body is being ripped apart, and it's sort of like, let's go buy some cabbages across from the breaking wheel. You know what I mean? It was like that only a
Yeah.
few hundred years ago. And sort of it's not only about violence, it's about our sensibility and our sensitivity to things that maybe seem disturbing, like someone with their personal knife at the table, you know, cutting off pieces of it. There's a reason why that became obsolete. There's a reason why, you know, snorting and shooting your boogers at other people became obsolete. But a few hundred years ago, it would have been like, yeah, boogers are everywhere, you know, and knives, and it was just a different. But at that time, that would have been sort of in the milieu at the time, totally natural, and
So you're
seemed
saying that
totally respectful and
downtown,
polite.
you're saying that like downtown Seattle is still 100 years ago?
There's a bubble. There's a sort of temporal bubble around downtown Seattle where people still have modern clothes, but they mentally, yeah, they exist.
It's a temporal snot bubble.
Yeah, governed by the camel from Camel Cigarettes. He's the sort of he's the poobah of that
Yeah.
particular bubble.
Is he the spider over the city?
Yeah, he's got long camel legs.
Is it a camel spider?
Sunglasses. Yeah, 90s sunglasses. No, what I was going to say is, so in a sense, as the sphere of empathy grows, our sensitivity to certain things changes, and you can feel it in your life. You've probably not been sensitive to things that maybe now you're sensitive to, and the steps forward can proliferate out at the rate of person-to-person communication. But if person-to-person communication becomes something that's completely democratic and distributed, like the internet, then that becomes exponential.
Mm-hmm.
And so the internet is causing the sphere of empathy, the expansion of the sphere of empathy, to explode far beyond what it did in the past few hundred years. And we're becoming like this single organism. So if we think of ourselves and ourselves being sort of tapped into the internet as this single organism, it's more like when one person gets really worked up about the pygmies in Africa and how they're treated or how they don't have water or whatever it is, and they get really worked up about that, if they have the tools and the means to make people more aware of that or get it on the internet or go on Joe Rogan and talk about it, then it's sort of like being a body and having a pain in your kidney or something, like, you know what I mean? If you look at the whole thing as your body, then the pains that happen are where you send resources. And that's kind of part of the whole sort of expansion of that sphere. And I think that's kind of all tied into what we were talking about earlier about the technology now becoming more like a portal to something that sort of our birthright, some sort of universal consciousness that exists in a very much more physical way than maybe the Jungian sort of collective unconscious. You know what I mean? It's right in front of you. It's on your screen. And saying, oh, you shouldn't check your phone is kind of like saying, don't tap into this thing that has been coming for the last 500 years. What's wrong with you? Okay, boomer.
I think...
you know what I mean? It's really... I really think that in 20 years, it'll be absurd to say things like that.
Yeah, and
Not that there aren't problems with it.
right, yeah, as I think to the extent that it increases the bandwidth of empathy in the sense that I can immediately know how my actions affect somebody else, and if I know that it hurts them, and have a functioning uh, empathy organ, then I'm like, I just don't want to do that because I just don't enjoy it. I don't like it.
Right.
But then, and on the other side, if I could also know and see and be confident and that I will reap the results of doing an action that benefits somebody else and it benefits me, then I'm probably more likely to do those things anyway because it's just, I like this better. It
But why
seems
do you
like,
help old ladies across the street? Because her gratitude is you could get gratitude in lots of ways. Why is that? Why is that an act that requires some sort of compensation for you to do that? You just do it. It's automatic.
yeah,
Because it
I
hurts
think,
you not to do that. Right.
right. And you would know that if I walk on and I don't do that, I'm going to feel bad because I'm concerned about that lady. She can't, she could really use a hand, and I know that she'll feel better, and I will feel better if I if I help versus if I don't help. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's a selfish thing, but it's selfish in the best possible. It's like magnanimous selfishness, maybe.
But I think it's less of, I think putting it in the sort of from the perspective of I'm going to do things so that I get rewards is probably not quite accurate. I think it's more like I'm going to do things to eliminate pain, sort of like I have a headache, take an aspirin. I see an old lady trying to get across the street, I help her so that I don't then experience that guilt later. It's a removal of, it's sort of a getting back to neutral rather than do something positive to gain sort of an adrenaline boost or a endorphin boost or something like that. I think it's probably more like an aspirin than a bag of Flamin' Hot Cheetos or whatever she might give you as a reward. Here you go, Sonny, Flamin' Hot Cheetos.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks, Grandma.
That's gonna go great with my Code Red Mountain Dew.
No, everyone knows you like Baja Blast.
Yeah, I can't fool you.
Oh, that's yours. Mine is the red station wagon, and yours is Baja Blast Mountain Dew.
Fair enough. And that
From
giant
your
mug
nearest
you've got.
Taco Bell. It's not giant. It's normal size.
Actually, I can. Okay.
Actually,
Yeah.
I can.
It's but so to that degree, when I was sort of what I call a flaming evangelical Christian,
Yeah.
there was this guy that I would read named John Piper, and he would talk about this idea of Christian hedonism, which is, and you can find verses where Jesus even talks about like doing things expecting that your Father in heaven will reward you, kind of, and
It's like Pascal's wager sort of thing. Believe just in case.
yeah,
You never know.
No.
Might as well place your bets.
Uh,
Is it kind of like that? You know
I
what
don't-
I
I
mean?
mean,
You know what I
it's-
mean by Pascal's wager?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, don't, why take a
What have you
risk?
got to lose? Yeah. If it's all
Yeah.
blackness afterward, then your chips are gone anyway.
Yeah, but it seems more like the idea that no, there is reward and a satisfaction of some desire in doing things like helping the old lady across the street, even if that thing is to mitigate guilt. Well, that's the thing that I gain. That's my reward, is the mitigation of guilt. It doesn't necessarily. It's not a. So if I'm faced with that decision, I can do it and get a reward, or I could not do it and feel guilty.
Right.
But so if I do it, I mitigate the guilt. So it's in a sense, it's like feeling okay and feeling normal is the reward, because
Right. Yeah. That's
because
kind of what
not-
that's kind of what I'm saying. Just getting you up to baseline. Yeah.
and maybe
Yeah.
I mean, it's the idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, in the sense that
Right.
that knowing if I were them, I would want to be treated in this way is sort of, it's rewarding. I mean, imagine what it would be like to have no guilt and for there to be no sort of like we're so aware of desperation and depression in different people that we know in different situations all around us. What if that just wasn't there? And how much of a reward would that be, that you could go anywhere and essentially refer to anybody as brother or sister, mother, father, aunt, or uncle? Because I mean, essentially, we are just a huge extended family, right?
I think that's why it makes sense that there are cultures that use that terminology. I mean, people use brother in India for strangers on the street. They'll call you brother. Hey, brother.
Yeah.
And when maybe they call me brother, it makes me feel uncomfortable because I'm just not used to that level of familiarity. But that's totally natural in Indian culture, right? People call it friend. Have you ever had someone on the street trying to sell you something, probably not local, from another country, say, "Hey, friend, you want to buy a watch or something like that?" They call you friend because that's what they use in their language.
Yeah.
They use friend, or we would just say, what would we say? What do people say? What do we say? What do Americans say to each other? Sir. We say sir. It's so formal. Yeah. Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Excuse me, ma'am. We have there's a level of distance in those words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you, maybe that one way to look at the internet is to frame it in the idea of, when we as human beings began this journey, we were kind of a small band of organisms living together, right? But then as we evolved, we spread out around the globe, and
we lost touch.
And we lost touch, exactly. And
that's an interesting image.
Yeah, and like you said about the internet being the thing, almost maybe we've been aching to create,
birthright.
to reconnect us to reconnect us to
very
everybody.
Interesting.